As of the making of this video, I've not heard a peep out of Erasmus, even though I've left messages for him with links to both of the responses I've posted so far. Perhaps he will reply someday, perhaps not. At any rate, maybe this quixotic exercise will do some listener some good, or at least afford some merriment. So I'll continue screaming into the void for the release that's in it. And of course, there are always a few trolls who will find in my videos a chance to air their uninformed opinions, and who knows, maybe that will do them some good, provide them with a needed safety valve or something. This week's clutch of questions is a really wretched lot. And if the quality continues to deteriorate as the trajectory so far suggests, then I can't imagine how idiotic these questions will be by the time Erasmus is finished. It gives me no joy to respond to such low-caliber stuff as this. I do so at this point for two reasons. First, I committed to the project and I like to see through to completion whatever I start. And second, I think it's important to know what the enemy is thinking. I have little confidence at this point that what lies ahead will be edifying. I can only hope that it will be revealing. I trust you see what I mean. We're off to a bad start this week. I think my response is going to have to focus on that neurotic mental legerdemain known as projection. Erasmus, one of us does indeed pretend to have all the answers, but of the two of us, I am not that person, and I don't know a single atheist who would dream of making such an outlandish claim. In hopes of getting you to understand not just how insulting this is, but how wide of the mark as well, I will here address you as though you might ever watch this video, a proposition in which I have little confidence, and will ask you, in light of this insulting question, to consider your own 24th question and my response to it. Although it was rather presumptuous of you to frame question 24 this way, I will nevertheless admit to claiming both labels and will be happy to tell you why. I wear the label of atheism because I do not believe in God. That's all that label means. I own the label of agnosticism because of my doubts as to whether or not the question of God's existence can ever be finally settled, and I will not claim to know something that is unknowable in principle. In other words, one of those labels has to do with belief, or more accurately, lack thereof, and the other with knowledge claims. If you cannot see how those two things can coexist without any tension at all in the mind of a non-believer, then I'm not sure I can help you. But I hope it will at least put to rest that idiotic charge you made in question 21 that I pretend to have all the answers. I wear the badge of agnosticism for precisely the reason that I do not pretend to have all the answers. Can you say the same of yourself? Do you know what that kind of honesty even feels like? Now I'll return to the original order of these increasingly insulting questions. Why do you claim to be skeptical when you are unwilling to change your mind? Wow. First of all, Erasmus, I don't claim to be skeptical. It simply is the case that, when the circumstances call for it, I am skeptical. The only people I've ever heard make that claim about themselves are people who have swallowed a bunch of bullshit conspiracy theories and thus proclaim themselves vaccine skeptics, or 9/11 skeptics, or climate change skeptics, or moon landing skeptics. In other words, deniers, not skeptics. I'll bet you make that kind of claim, don't you, Erasmus? I'll bet you're an evolution skeptic, by which I mean an evolution denier, not someone who has followed the evidence where it leads. You know how I know that? Because of the way you framed the last three questions I'll be treating in today's Sunday school lesson. But the second part of your question, oh man. How dare you, you clueless, arrogant upstart. Over the course of my 72 years of life, I have changed my mind about absolutely everything. That's because I was willing to change my mind. That's because I became skeptical and started following evidence instead of swallowing the kind of made-up bullshit you're full of, Erasmus. This is personal for me. You lobbed this arrogant question at someone who was born into a mind-killing fundamentalist Christian cult and spent much of his life fighting his way out of its clutches. My journey was a struggle that cost me dear, and to this day my brother believes and has told me that my education has ruined me and my mind is shut tighter than a gnat's asshole. He's as blinded by projection as you are, Erasmus. I'll bet the two of you would get along just famously. How willing are you to change your mind about anything, Erasmus? Never mind responding. I've watched your soliloquy, and I know the answer to that question. Here's a howler. I've never actually gone to or after a Christian museum, so I guess Erasmus must have in mind certain atheist activists who are occasionally picketing Ken Ham's Ark Encounter and Creation Museum in Kentucky, or make debunk videos about Carl Bowell's Creation Evidence Museum on the Paluxy River. Of course, I'm making a big assumption here, that when Erasmus indicates Christian museums, he means creationist museums. If he has any other kind of Christian museum in mind, I can't imagine anyone going after them. It is, of course, with creationist museums that many atheists have a problem, and I count myself among them. That's because they are by no means trying to tell the truth about anything. They are purveyors of disinformation, Erasmus, falsehoods, fairy tales masquerading as cosmic truths. They are to regular museums as jock itch is to jocks. I applaud those atheists who go after such travesties. Truth matters to me, Erasmus, and that makes your framing of this question just risible. We've already dispensed with question 24, so it's on to this one, and the short answer is, I don't reject people's personal experiences. I don't doubt for a moment that they had such experiences. After all, I've had plenty too, and I know many people who have also had them. I do, however, reject certain interpretations of those experiences. Let me give you a couple of examples from my own unfortunate family. One is my mother, who lost her second child to pneumonia when she was only 9 days old. I believe that loss drove my mother insane, and I can certainly understand why. I can't imagine the tide of grief that must absolutely have overwhelmed her. One day, about a month after my baby sister died, my mother was sitting beside her grave and heard a voice over her shoulder crying, "Mama, Mama." She was convinced that what she had heard was the voice of her baby girl calling out to her from heaven, and it is that experience, more than anything, that drove her and her family with her straight into the loving arms and tender ministrations of an absolutist, fundamentalist, mind control Christian cult. I don't doubt her experience. Anyone so overcome by grief would certainly have had such experiences. But experiences like that are hallucinations. They don't point to an actual reality. If you don't think them through, they can destroy your life and that of your children. Here's another. One of my nephews, who got his start in life in the same fundamentalist swamp I was raised in, was slain in the spirit at a revival meeting when he was a teenager. It was a Damascus Road experience, a direct encounter with God, according to him. It changed him fundamentally, he claims. He's been a true believer ever since and will never doubt the validity of his experience. Nor do I doubt the validity of his experience. What I doubt is the validity of his interpretation of that experience. Do you understand that I'm addressing your question, Erasmus? That I'm showing you what's wrong with your question? There are less complicated ways of understanding what my nephew experienced than to invoke a disembodied mind of infinite wisdom and virtue who created a universe of trillions of galaxies with an incantation spell and personally knocked my nephew off his feet with a little help from the preacher man one night at a revival. Occam's razor is your friend, whether you recognize it or not. I've had amazing inner experiences. Moments when it seemed to me that my mind's eye had penetrated the deepest mysteries and seen straight through to the beating heart of the universe. These could properly be called mystical experiences, and afterwards I've thanked gods I don't even believe in for the THC that made such experiences possible. Brain chemistry is an amazing and wonderful thing. If you understand evolutionary biology and psychology, you understand why, and you also understand how easily subjective experience can be misinterpreted. Moving on. In the description beneath his video, Erasmus attempted to fix this question by supplying the missing subject, which he intended to be understood as the second-person pronoun you. That fixed the question mechanically speaking, but it remains an incoherent catastrophe anyway. I can't even tell for sure what it means. First, the conditional. If atheism is just an opinion, well, who in the world describes atheism as an opinion in the first place? It might well be described as a condition. That's how I'd explain its relevance to my life, atheism being a condition of unbelief, or a philosophical position, which also applies here, but it would never occur to me to understand it as an opinion. I think the framing of this conditional tells us more about Erasmus's own misunderstanding of atheism than it tells us about atheism itself. Was he trying to send the message that the non-belief of atheists is just their opinion or something? I guess I could counter with the charge that his belief is just his opinion. Is that the meaning? I can't tell. And then there's the rest of it. Why do you behave like it is a fact? Can someone help me out here? Erasmus isn't making sense, and he's also silent, so I'm not going to waste my time seeking clarification from that quarter. I reckon I'll have to work it out for myself. Let's see, atheism is a fact, isn't it? Isn't a fact something that is true of a thing that actually exists? It's a fact that I'm an atheist. My atheism is therefore a fact about me. It's ludicrous to imagine someone saying, that guy holds the opinion of atheism. What are you trying to ask here, Erasmus? This makes no sense whatsoever. Erasmus, unclear writing is often a symptom of muddled thinking. You should take that to heart. Before we get to Erasmus's list of examples, we need to supply what's missing from his 27th question, a question he did not attempt to repair after the fact. He's only framed half of it. If you use this figure of speech to square something, it means you're going to fit that thing to something else. It's the something else that's missing here. I assume that the thing to which I must square this dismal fact is any claim I might make that instead of plunging those who lose their faith into a life of murder and mayhem, the abandoning of religion typically results in people leading better lives than they did before, more honest, generous, thoughtful lives. It certainly has in my case, and that's been the case with many other atheists I know and whose life stories I've heard. So, how would I square the insight I shared just now with the fact that some of the most brutal murderers in the history of the world were atheists? Is that your meaning, Erasmus? If it is, then I would respond by asking Erasmus to square what is no doubt his conviction, that belief in Jesus makes you a better person, with the fact that some of the worst mass murderers in history were and are Christians. And my list would include Hitler, since he belongs in my list of Christians, not Erasmus's list of atheists, and Vlad Putin also belongs on my list as well. I trust you can see from the way I countered his charge that his question is essentially meaningless. It's no surprise to any thinking person that there are some seriously bad actors who march under all kinds of different banners, certainly including that of Christianity, and the bad behavior of some atheists cannot be generalized to tarnish all atheists any more than the bad behavior of some Americans makes all Americans a sick, twisted, stupid, violent people. Those who do make those kinds of generalizations are usually easy to spot because of their racism, misogyny, and xenophobia, all of which result from such generalizations, otherwise known as prejudices. I'm going to treat questions 28 through 30, the last three I'll be dealing with this week, as a single clutch of rotten eggs whose hatching I will attempt to forestall. Here's question 28. Here's question 29. And here's question 30. It's obvious that Erasmus never intended for this to be a fruitful exchange. None of his questions have been asked in good faith. I would actually have enjoyed talking about why I believe evolution to be true, as opposed to why I believe in evolution, as he framed it, and about the evidence for it, and about the documented observation of speciation events. But Erasmus wouldn't listen to what I have to say about any of that, and therefore doesn't merit the effort it would take to explain some of these things to him. Nor, in fact, does he deserve any further attempt on my part to engage him respectfully as a partner in conversation. I will, however, continue to address his questions. I believe my viewers are gaining some useful insights into the depth of arrogance and condescension that can be counted on to accompany willful ignorance and thus come naturally to certain Christians. I guess if God's on your side, you just win by default. I'm so glad I no longer think anything remotely like that.